pretty much ground zero for this whole cultural, social, political battle that's happening in our country is the schools. The issue that we're having is the
Yep.
teachers, starting from the teachers union on down, they are not neutral parties in a large part in many areas. When you go back to even how the country was started, you had people who left England because of the Church of England, and a lot of what we're is very
Mhm.
similar to a religion. And my question was, and my thought was, is it even realistically, forget about laws and constitution, is it even realistically possible to ask teachers in this environment with J6 and George Floyd, and people honestly think, if I don't support Black Lives Matter, I'm a bad person? Is it
Right.
possible for teachers to be neutral?
That is a really good question. I mean, I've been walking around thinking, well, surely it must be possible. I didn't know my teacher's politics, but you just made the point that we're in a different we're in a different world right now. We not everything was political. Going to Starbucks wasn't a political statement. There wasn't a Starbucks. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, so we didn't know the politics of CEOs. We didn't know the politics of our neighbors. We just did. It was actually considered sort of rude to openly discuss it in mixed company.
It was taboo.
And
Mhm.
yeah, it was really taboo. It was like stick to, the weather and things like that. And only when you know people really well, and you have to be delicate about it, because I think we understood that this could cause you to lose friends, or you could disagree, and it shouldn't be a kind of disagreement that would break up friendships, break up families, and it just wasn't done. And so, to your point, now that it is, can we really expect the people who are in there teaching our kids to be in a bubble, like leave that at the door? I honestly don't know the answer.
What is good? Osiris here, stuck in the middle. That was a clip from when Deb Philman and I had a discussion on her channel, The Reason We Learn. Check it out. I'll put a link in the description and the chat. Give her a shout out. It's really important to me to support other creators who are independent thinkers. And it was a wonderful discussion. I hope to have her on the channel and talk with her again. The takeaway that I got from that clip, I'm going to tie it into the Florida law. And this bill that's, the people who support it call it the parental rights. The people who are against it call it the Don't Say Gay bill. We've shifted from years ago when it was taboo to talk about these things, especially in the classroom, much less outside of it. We've moved left. The Overton window keeps pushing us left. Keeping things neutral is all the Florida bill is about. And I have criticism of Ron DeSantis and his response to it. What's happening is, if you don't know, people are putting pressure on Disney, one of the biggest companies in Florida, to put pressure on DeSantis to go against the bill. Obviously, that didn't work. But I want to talk about the response from DeSantis. I think he's great, but I'm going to talk about where I think he's missing the boat, and all Republicans are missing the boat. If you didn't hear it, here's what Ron DeSantis said.
So here's what I can tell you. In the state of Florida, we are not going to allow them to inject transgenderism into kindergarten. First graders shouldn't have woke gender ideology imposed in their curriculums. And that is what we're standing for, because we're standing for the kids and we're standing for the parents. And I can tell you this, the chance that I am going to back down from my commitment to students and back down from my commitment to parents' rights simply because of fraudulent media narratives or pressure from woke corporations, the chances of that are zero. When you have companies that have made a fortune off being family friendly and catering to families and young kids, they should understand that parents of young kids do not want this injected into their kids' kindergarten classroom. They do not want their first graders to go and being told that they can choose an opposite gender. That is not appropriate for those kids. And so if you're family friendly, understand the parents who are actually raising families, want to have their rights respected. And I also think that if you have companies like a Disney that are going to say and criticize parents' rights, they're going to criticize the fact that we don't want transgenderism in kindergarten and first grade classrooms, if that's the hill that they're going to die on, then how do they possibly explain lining their pockets with their relationship from the Communist Party of China? Because that's what they do, and they make a fortune, and they don't say a word about the really brutal practices that you see over there at the hands of the CCP. And so in Florida, our policy is going to be based on the best interest of Florida citizens, not on the musing of.
So at first, I was doing my own clapping like a baby seal, like, yeah, go get him, DeSantis, go get him.
Yes, queen, yes, queen, yes, queen.
I did that at first, but I got another perspective that made me change my mind a little bit. I think everything that DeSantis said there is right. I think it's accurate. But Nicholas J. Fuentes had a different take on it, and it made me it helped me formulate my take. I've always had a problem with these pieces of legislation, but what I heard from Fuentes helped me articulate my point better. So I don't agree with Fuentes, but I like his approach here, and it helped me out. Let me play a clip from his show.
On, then how do they possibly explain lining their pockets with their relationship from the Communist Party of China? Because that's what they do, and they make a fortune, and they don't say a word about the really brutal practices that you see over there at the hands of the CCP. What? He says, and so in Florida, our policies have to be based on the best interests of Florida citizens, not on the musings of woke corporations. Now, I have a big problem with this response, and this is the first thing I want to talk about. So what the hell does China have to do with any of this? Can anybody tell me that? And this is where you get a very schizophrenic GOP messaging. It's because a lot of these politicians who are conservative don't even know what they're fighting for. They don't even really know what they stand for. They do not have a coherent, cohesive, governing ideology or even a strategy. I think a lot of them are motivated by what is trending on Twitter. They'll say things that they think are popular. I think a lot of them will have some consultant in their ear. So in Governor DeSantis's team, his people, they're acting in the court of Ron DeSantis as courtiers, and they're kind of directing policy. They're directing the direction, they're directing the agenda of the state government, and that's another way that these politicians will be influenced. But I think there are so few politicians that have their own big idea, their own coherent idea, their own strategy, their own thing that they could follow through to its logical conclusions intellectually, but also strategically in terms of, where they want all of this to go, where they want this movement, this political campaign, what's our end game? How do we want to change America, and how do we want to get there?
Excellent perspective, excellent point by Fuentes there. It really made me think, because if you listen to this channel, I agree completely with DeSantis on the China issue. I believe China is influencing the destruction of our country without having to fire a bullet. I think China is behind why we didn't have to, but why we took a statue of our founding father, Thomas Jefferson, down out of the city hall of our biggest city, New York City, the true capital of our country. You would normally, back before the internet, it would take an invading army, just like when they toppled the statues in Iraq back in the day after the fall of their leaders. In history, this has always happened. If you're going to take a statue of a country's founding leaders, it would normally take an army, bullets to do that. And China was able, in my opinion, to do that without firing one bullet. So I think DeSantis was right about parental rights, obviously, about China. But Nick's point is so well stated. DeSantis is all over the map. I'm all over the map, too, at times. And even if we're right, because I don't have full proof of this, I don't want to get too much into the China thing, because that's not the point here. But even if we're right, and China is influencing us, ultimately we control what's acceptable in America. So they can try to force it upon us and we can say, well, that's not acceptable. And that would only further expose that they're not listening to us. Nick's take is absolutely right. Bringing up their hypocrisy with China is not a principle. That's not an underlining foundation for the bill. Bringing up fighting for parental rights isn't even a founding principle or ideology for the bill. What's the bigger picture? Where are you taking us with this? And I mentioned this well before I even started listening to Nick Fuentes. I said the core issue is teaching any opinion. It doesn't matter what the subject is. You should never teach an opinion in school. I don't care if it's K through 12. I don't even understand why the bill's K through 3. It's just K through 3rd grade. When I first covered it a while back, I thought it was K through 6. They keep revising it. This should never, ever teach an opinion as fact. Give me an opinion. Who's the best player of all time? Is it Jordan or LeBron? Obviously, you shouldn't be teaching that as a fact. And so it's not just about gender or race or politics. You can't be teaching Black Lives Matter as a definitive, positive movement for social justice and change. And I label myself a constitutional libertarian, something to that effect. And I hate labeling myself because I'm not the most knowledgeable in any of these things. But that's where I'll do this. That's where I want to aspire to get to. And to me, I mentioned it in that clip with Deb Philman, the country was founded because the Pilgrims or Puritans were religiously persecuted in England because the king was trying to control the population. Does this sound familiar? Was trying to control the population through propaganda and religion. And if you didn't buy into the state religion, you were ostracized. And back then, you were literally persecuted, potentially. So they fled to Holland. They fled to wherever they could flee to. Then they fled over here to this country. So they want us to think about 1619 and the slaves, and that's the founding. They're taking it away from the essence of the founding. That's the essence. So any opinion being taught in school is unconstitutional. It's not about parental rights. The parental rights is a way to hold teachers accountable to the constitutional principle. That's why I like listening to different ideas. He really helped me formulate my idea. Nick Fuentes and we'd part ways, and I get it now fully. Now that I've listened to him more, I always got it, but I really get it now why Comic Dave Smith, after he debated Nick Fuentes, and it was a very good debate, it wasn't like a contentious one, afterwards he said, I wish he wasn't so authoritarian. Nick Fuentes' take, let me show you where he's going with this. He's going down a religious path.
There is no God telling people you can't do this sexual thing, you can't do that, you can't eat meat on Friday. Their morality says do what you want, seek pleasure, as long as it doesn't infringe on other people. I mean, that's generally what it is. And if we're defending...
That's the libertarian approach. I just caught this in the middle of the clip. Right there, he's knocking my approach. My approach is, if you are outside of school, I don't care what you want to do as long as you don't infringe on my rights. And that's where I'm missing from Ron DeSantis. I don't know what his principle is. I don't know if it's that or what. So that's the biggest problem I have with Ron DeSantis right now. Trump has the same problem too, though. But I want to know, what is your principle? Nick is telling us his principle. His is religion.
Defending our way of life on those terms, we're going to come up short. You cannot defend our way of life in those terms. You will wind up, arguing yourself into, you'll wind up doing this. We're only supporting this. We're just supporting this, and negotiating yourself down to a liberal position. That's what's going on. That's what's been going on. We need to use our moral language. And our moral language is far richer and far more profound, and it also happens to be objectively true. And our moral language is concerned with sin and God and a particular God and a real Savior and a real law, a real religious law. And that's the kind of language we need to use. Not saying...
Did you peep what he just said there? Everything he said, what he's saying is he said objectively true. That's authoritarianism. It's just coming from a different standpoint. So right now, my beliefs, what's happening is the establishment, the left, is ruling things right now, and they control pretty much everything. Nick Fuentes is against that, but he wants to replace he doesn't have a problem with the authoritarianism. He's not for liberty. He wants his religion to replace the religion of critical theory or neo-Marxism or whatever you want to call it, or establishmentism is probably the best word for it. It's whatever, Ukraine, it's the pandemic. Whatever the establishment is, that's the religion. So he wants to replace that. So Nick and I are really overlapping right now because we're both against who has the authority right now. Let's go to a bizarro universe where Nick has power and the people who believe in critical theory don't have power. I bet you I would align with them a lot more because they would be going against the authoritarianism. That's all that's really happening.
Saying, hey, we're not homophobic. This bill's perfectly acceptable. It's perfectly moral. It's perfectly passable because it doesn't ban gay language. Well, let's defend it from a right-wing perspective. We're the right. Let's be the right. Let's defend it on right-wing terms. Let's defend it with our moral language. We are Christian after all, are we not?
So there you have it on both sides. My criticism, just to summarize, of Ron DeSantis is, I want to know what your guiding principle is. And I don't know. I don't want to put words in his mouth. I think it is the Constitution, but I need to hear you say that. Instead of, I guess you could bring up China as well, but as long as you give me your fundamental position. For me, it's the Establishment Clause. My interpretation of the Establishment Clause in the Constitution is separation of church and state, and that basically means religion. You can't put an ideology in school and teach it as fact, not in a public school. You can do it in private school. You can do it in homeschooling, not in a public school. That shouldn't be happening. So you need a bill to protect that. You don't need to do parental rights and all that. I guess you could do those as well, but that's the big picture that no GOP person has covered to me. They're putting specifically critical theory in bills. It's not critical theory. I don't want you teaching Nick Fuentes theory. I don't want you teaching religion. My end take on it was, if you watch that video, I put the link for Deb Filman. Maybe I'll clip it up too. My final thought is, I don't like laws that can't be enforced. I'm not for cameras in schools. I'm not for setting up a hotline. I guess it's okay, but setting up a hotline for kids to call in or parents to call in with concerns. I'm really more, if we can't police what's happening in schools, which I don't think it's possible, then let it be a free-for-all. You can teach whatever the hell you want, as long as you're not, obviously there's some limits, breaking the law. You can teach whatever you want. And what's going to happen is most people in society don't want this. Most people in society would rather you be neutral. So what will happen is parents will complain. They will say, I don't want my child with this teacher who's on the radical left or radical right or radical libertarian. I want my kid with a teacher that's just going to teach how to read, how to do math, science, like we used to do. And the market will even itself out if the government gets the hell out the way. And I know it's tough because the tax dollars is how they're ruling this thing. Federal tax dollars go to these critical theory programs and the schools want money. So okay, I'll teach this, to give me the money. But I think at the end of the day, more people will homeschool. Even with that federal money, it's going to go to schools with less enrollment. So I think it should be the wild, wild west. Even with the government being involved, the market will correct it. I think. Let me know what you think. Take care.